I'm Olivia Smith, 28 years old, and 6 months ago, the most devastating betrayal of my life happened. I discovered that the people I trusted most saw me as nothing more than a personal ATM with a convenient sob story attached. But what my own mother did next was even worse. If you've ever poured your heart into something only to have the people closest to you dismiss it until they wanted a piece of the profits, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this particular kind of family betrayal. Looking back, I should have seen the signs earlier. Maybe it started the day I met Christopher at that tiny coffee shop on 5th Street. The one with mismatched chairs and the barista who knew everyone's order by heart. I was 22, fresh out of college, with a marketing degree I wasn't sure I wanted to use, sketching jewelry designs in the margins of my notebook while nursing a lukewarm latte. He slid into the seat across from me without asking, his dark eyes fixed on the intricate mandala earring design I'd been perfecting for weeks. "That's incredible," he said, pointing to my sketch. "Do you actually make these?" I remember the exact way the afternoon light caught the small scar above his left eyebrow, how his genuine interest made something flutter in my chest. Most guys my age wanted to talk about sports or themselves. Christopher wanted to know about my creative process, about the inspiration behind each piece. When I told him I'd been making jewelry since high school, selling a few pieces to friends here and there, he didn't laugh or suggest I find a real job like my parents had been doing for months. "You should have a proper studio," he said, studying another sketch of chandelier earrings with tiny freshwater pearls. "This isn't hobby work. This is art." That was Christopher. He saw potential where others saw pipe dreams. Within 3 months, we were practically inseparable. He'd drive me to craft shows on weekends, helping me set up my booth at farmers markets and local art fairs, while I arranged my handmade silver rings and gemstone necklaces on black velvet displays. He'd chat with customers about the unique properties of different stones, even though he'd only learned about them the week before, because he wanted to help me sell more pieces. Our first apartment together was a cramped one-bedroom, above Mrs. Chen's bakery, but it smelled like cinnamon rolls every morning and had perfect natural light streaming through the east-facing windows. Christopher cleared out half the living room so I could set up a proper workspace with a jeweler's bench, proper lighting, and organized storage for my growing collection of beads, wire, and precious metals. Every evening, he'd come home from his job at the accounting firm and find me hunched over my bench, torch in hand, silver solder cooling on the ceramic pad beside me. "How was your day at the office, honey?" he'd ask, kissing the top of my head and settling into his reading chair with whatever mystery novel he was currently devouring. "Productive," I'd say, holding up a pair of earrings that caught the lamplight. "Mrs. Patterson commissioned a matching bracelet for these, and I think I figured out how to get that blue-green patina effect you liked on the copper pieces." Those early years felt like we were building something magical together. Christopher would bring home Chinese takeout from his favorite place down the street, the one where they knew to make his lo mein extra spicy and my sweet and sour chicken mild. We'd eat cross-legged on our thrift store couch, my latest creations spread across the coffee table between us, discussing everything from the philosophical implications of handmade versus mass-produced goods to whether we wanted to get a cat. By our second year together, I was making enough from jewelry sales to cover my half of the rent, though just barely. Christopher never made me feel guilty about the months when custom orders were slow and he had to cover my portion of utilities. Instead, he'd suggest new marketing strategies, drive me to craft shows in neighboring towns, and spend his weekends helping me photograph pieces for the online shop I was building. "Your family still thinks this is just a phase?" he asked one Sunday morning, carefully holding a delicate silver necklace up to catch the light while I adjusted camera settings. I paused, remembering last week's phone call with my mother. "Mom keeps asking when I'm going to apply for real jobs with my marketing degree. She thinks I'm wasting my education. Making beautiful things that people love enough to buy isn't wasting anything," Christopher said firmly. "Besides, you're using your marketing skills every day. Your Instagram is better than half the companies I work with." The golden period started in our 3rd year together. By then, my cute little hobby was generating more monthly income than my father made at his middle management position, though I hadn't told my family those specific numbers. I had a waiting list of customers for custom engagement rings, corporate clients commissioning gifts for their employees, and had been featured in 2 local magazines. Christopher proposed to me on the anniversary of that first meeting in the coffee shop, with a ring he'd designed himself and had me make without realizing what it was for. "I wanted something no one else would ever have," he said, sliding the hammered platinum band with its unusual geometric setting onto my finger. "Something that could only come from your hands." Our typical day that summer involved me working in my expanded studio space. We'd moved to a 2-bedroom apartment with better light from 7 in the morning until early afternoon, then meeting Christopher for lunch at whatever new restaurant we wanted to try. We'd spend evenings planning our October wedding, debating the merits of various catering options and whether to include my difficult family members in more than just the ceremony itself. I was happy in a way that felt almost dangerous, like the universe might notice and decide I was having too much fun. Christopher would come home to find me at my bench, Christmas music playing even though it was July, working on a complex commissioned piece for a client who'd found me through word-of-mouth referrals. "Good day," he'd ask, and I'd show him the progress on whatever I was creating. A memorial pendant incorporating a loved one's birthstone. Wedding rings that would be blessed in a ceremony I'd be invited to attend. A corporate gift recognizing 25 years of service. The best day, I'd answer, meaning it completely. But there were small things I should have noticed. The way my mother's voice changed when she asked about Christopher's job versus Sophie's little business. How my father would change the subject whenever Christopher brought up my latest commission or magazine feature. The fact that my younger sister Emma called me only when she needed money for textbooks or car repairs, never to hear about my successes or challenges. The catalyst came on a Thursday morning in September, 3 weeks before our wedding. I was putting final touches on a custom necklace for a bride who was flying in from California specifically to pick it up when my phone rang. My mother's contact photo filled the screen, the picture I'd taken of her in our backyard last Christmas, smiling in front of the tree Christopher and I had spent hours decorating together. "Hi, Mom," I said, not looking up from the tiny clasp I was soldering. "What's up?" "Olivia, honey, I need to ask you something important about the wedding." I could hear something different in her voice, a tightness that made me set down my torch and give her my full attention. It was the same tone she'd used when she told me my grandfather was sick, or when she'd called to say they couldn't afford to help with my college tuition after all. "Okay," I said carefully. "What is it?" "Well, your father and I have been thinking. Since you and Christopher are doing so well, and with your little business bringing in some extra money, we were wondering if you might be able to help us out with something." The words "little business" hit me like cold water, the same dismissive phrase she'd been using for years. But there was something else in her voice now, something that made my stomach clench with a feeling I couldn't quite name yet. The crisis that changed everything began with a simple phone call that morning, but it would take me weeks to understand that the real betrayal had been building for years. Every dismissive comment, every time they'd changed the subject when I mentioned a success, every way they'd made me feel like I was playing dress-up in a grown-up's business instead of actually running one. What I didn't know yet was that my mother had been collecting information about my income for months, preparing for this conversation in ways that would soon become terrifyingly clear. But that morning, all I knew was that something felt wrong with the way she was talking to me, like I was a resource to be managed instead of her daughter to be celebrated. I have a very clear memory of my childhood home's landline ringing at exactly 6:15 every Sunday evening, while my mother prepared dinner and my father watched whatever football game was on television. The sound meant family time, meant checking in with relatives, meant maintaining the connections that my parents insisted were the most important thing in life. "Family comes first," my mother would say, stirring whatever was simmering on the stove. "Everything else is just temporary." But family, I learned early, came with conditions that were never clearly stated until you broke them. My mother Sarah was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday, anniversary, and holiday with thoughtful gifts and perfectly coordinated celebrations. She ran the household with military precision, ensuring my father's shirts were pressed exactly the way he liked them, and that Sunday dinners featured all of his favorite foods. My father David worked the same job for 18 years, providing steady income and predictable health insurance, while complaining constantly about his boss's incompetence and his coworkers' laziness. They met in college, got married the weekend after graduation, bought their first house within 2 years, and had me 3 years after that. Their life followed a script that worked for them, and they expected my life to follow a similar script that worked for them too. College degree, stable job with benefits, marriage to someone from a good family, grandchildren within a reasonable timeline. My jewelry making fell nowhere within that acceptable narrative. The first time I tried to explain my business plans to them, I was 24 and had just landed my largest custom order to date, wedding jewelry for a couple who'd found my work through Instagram and were paying me more for one set than I'd previously made in 3 months combined. I drove to their house on a Saturday afternoon, portfolio in hand, excited to share something I was genuinely proud of. "That's wonderful, honey," my mother said, barely glancing at the photos of engagement rings and matching wedding bands I'd laid out on their kitchen table. "But you know this can't last forever. What happens when people stop wanting handmade things? What about retirement planning, health insurance?" My father lowered his newspaper just long enough to add, "It's good that you have a hobby that makes a little extra money. But Christopher has a real career. You don't want to be a burden on him." The word burden stuck with me for weeks. Not because I thought it was true, but because it revealed how they saw my work. No matter how much I made, how many clients I served, or how much I loved what I did, they would always see it as something Christopher was generously tolerating rather than something valuable in its own right. My younger sister Emma was different, or so I thought, 2 years younger than me. She was pursuing a graduate degree in social work with plans to help underserved communities access mental health resources. She called me regularly, asking for advice about everything from relationships to career decisions. When she needed money for textbooks or unexpected expenses, I was always willing to help, seeing it as investing in her future and supporting someone whose heart was in the right place. "You're so lucky," she told me during one of our phone calls, "getting to make pretty things all day and call it work. I wish I could do something creative like that instead of writing all these boring research papers." I should have heard the dismissal hidden in pretty things, the implication that what I did was decorative rather than substantive. But Emma said it with such apparent affection that I took it as a compliment, proof that at least one family member understood that I was happy with my choices. Christopher's family provided a sharp contrast to my own. His parents had run their own small restaurant for 25 years, building a business from nothing through 70-hour weeks and constant innovation. When they met me, they asked detailed questions about my process, my suppliers, my marketing strategies. His mother wanted to see my workspace and understand how I priced custom pieces. His father asked if I'd ever considered expanding into wholesale or teaching workshops. "Small business is the backbone of this country," Christopher's father said during our first family dinner together. "Anyone willing to take that risk and put in that work deserves respect." Being around Christopher's family felt like breathing cleaner air. They celebrated each other's successes without immediately calculating how those successes might benefit them. When Christopher got promoted to senior associate at his firm, they planned a dinner party to honor his achievement. When I was featured in a regional wedding magazine, they bought 5 copies and distributed them to their friends. But my own family's attitude became more obvious in contrast. When Christopher's family asked about my business, my mother would interrupt to talk about his stable career and how practical he was. When I mentioned winning a local artisan award, my father would change the subject to ask Christopher about interest rates or the housing market. The day everything changed started like most other Thursdays. I woke up at 6:30, made coffee in the French press Christopher had given me for my birthday, and settled at my workbench with my current project. The bride who'd commissioned the piece was flying in from California the following Tuesday, and I wanted everything perfect. The rose gold setting polished to exactly the right sheen, the vintage-inspired details catching light from every angle. Christopher had already left for an early meeting with a new client, kissing me goodbye while I was still half asleep and promising to pick up dinner from our favorite Thai place on his way home. The apartment was quiet except for the gentle hum of my ventilation system and the NPR program playing softly from the kitchen. I was using a delicate pointed tool to add texture to a tiny rose gold leaf when my phone rang. The sudden sound made me flinch, and I had to steady my hand before setting the piece down safely. My mother's contact photo smiled at me from the screen, the picture I'd taken of her at last year's Christmas gathering when she was wearing the pearl earrings I'd made for her birthday. "Hi, Mom," I answered, flexing my fingers to work out the tension from detailed work. "How are you doing?" "Oh, fine, honey. Your father's dealing with some nonsense at work again, and Emma's stressed about her thesis deadline, but that's not why I'm calling." There was something different in her voice, a careful quality that made me pay closer attention. My mother was usually straightforward, sometimes bluntly so. This cautious tone was new. "What's going on?" I asked, moving away from my workbench to sit in the armchair by the window. "Well, your father and I have been doing some financial planning, and we've run into a bit of a situation. Nothing terrible, just some unexpected expenses that are causing a cash flow problem." I waited for her to continue, watching a woman across the street load grocery bags into her car while her toddler tried to help by carrying a loaf of bread. "The thing is," my mother continued, "we know you and Christopher are doing well, and with your little business bringing in some extra money now, we thought maybe you might be able to help us out, just temporarily, of course." The phrase "little business" felt like a slap. After years of building something I was proud of, after multiple magazine features and a waiting list of clients, she was still talking about my work like it was a craft fair hobby that occasionally produced pocket change. "What kind of help are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, not much. Maybe 15,000. We could pay you back over time, once things settle down. Family helps family, you know. $15,000. Not much." The casual way she said it revealed everything about how she viewed my financial situation. This wasn't a daughter asking a struggling artist for help. This was someone who'd been watching my success and calculating how it might benefit her. "Mom, that's a lot of money," I said carefully. "What's the emergency?" "It's not an emergency, exactly. More of an opportunity. Your father has a chance to invest in his friend's business, but we need to move quickly. And Emma's graduate program costs are higher than we expected. Plus, we've been wanting to redo the kitchen for years. An opportunity. Kitchen renovation. These weren't the urgent needs," her voice had implied. They were wants, wishes, projects they'd decided I should fund because my little business had apparently made me wealthy enough to bankroll their desires. "I need to think about it," I said. "And talk to Christopher." "Of course, honey. But don't take too long. These opportunities don't wait forever." After I hung up, I sat in that chair for 20 minutes, watching normal people go about their Thursday morning routines while processing what had just happened. My mother hadn't asked how my business was going. She hadn't mentioned my upcoming wedding, or asked if I needed anything. She'd called with her hand out, expecting me to fund her family's wish list because she'd finally realized that my cute hobby generated real money. The first betrayal wasn't the phone call itself. It was the realization that she'd been tracking my success all along, not because she was proud of me, but because she was calculating how it might serve her family's needs. Every dismissive comment about my little business had been strategic, designed to minimize what I did, so that my money would feel like a family resource rather than individual achievement. When Christopher came home that evening with pad thai and spring rolls, he found me still sitting in that chair, staring out the window as afternoon faded into evening. "Sophie, what's wrong?" I told him about the phone call, about the casual way my mother had asked for $15,000 like she was borrowing a cup of sugar, about how she'd called my business little while simultaneously expecting it to fund their kitchen renovation. Christopher set down the food and knelt beside my chair, taking my hands in his. "You know you don't owe them anything, right? You've built something incredible, and it's yours, not theirs to claim or dismiss or use whenever they need cash." But even as he said it, I could hear my mother's voice in my head. "Family comes first. Everything else is just temporary." I was about to discover just how temporary my family's love was when money entered the equation. 3 days after that phone call, I made a decision that felt both obvious and terrifying. I called my mother back and told her I couldn't loan them the money. Not wouldn't, couldn't. I explained that most of my income was already reinvested in the business. That Christopher and I had our own wedding expenses and future plans to consider, and that $15,000 wasn't pocket change for us despite whatever she might think about our financial situation. I understand you're disappointed, I said, trying to keep my voice steady while I paced around our apartment. But this isn't about not wanting to help family. It's about not having $15,000 lying around to loan out. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Olivia, my mother finally said, her voice colder than I'd ever heard it, I'm very disappointed in you. Your father and I have supported you through college, through all your little creative phases, and now when we need help, you're being selfish. Selfish? The word came out louder than I intended. Mom, I'm not being selfish. I'm being realistic about my finances. Don't take that tone with me. We know you're making good money now. Emma saw those magazine articles about your business. We know what custom wedding jewelry costs these days. Emma had been researching my business, reporting back to our parents about my success. The sister who called me for advice and emotional support had been gathering intelligence for this moment. Just because I make good money doesn't mean I have $15,000 available to loan out, I tried to explain. Business income isn't the same as disposable income. Well, maybe if you explained your situation better, we could understand why you can't help your own family in their time of need. That's when I realized she wanted detailed financial information. Not just confirmation that I could afford to help them, but a complete picture of my income and expenses that would allow them to determine how much I should contribute to their various projects and desires. I'm not comfortable sharing my detailed finances, I said. Christopher and I manage our money privately, just like you and Dad manage yours. We're not asking for details, honey. Just basic information so we know you're not keeping money from family when we need help. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with my mother using every guilt tactic in her considerable arsenal. I was being ungrateful for their support. I was putting money before family relationships. I was forgetting where I came from and who had believed in me when no one else did. None of it was true, but by the time I hung up, I felt like I'd been turned inside out and examined for flaws. Christopher found me crying in our bedroom, an hour later curled up with our cat Luna in my lap, scratching behind her ears while tears dripped onto her gray fur. What happened? He asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. I told him about the call, about my mother's accusations and her demand for financial transparency, about how my own sister had apparently been spying on my business success and reporting back to our parents. She made me feel like I was betraying them. I said, like being successful was somehow taking something away from them. Christopher was quiet for a long moment, stroking Luna's back while she purred between us. You know what this is really about, he finally said. They spent years dismissing what you do, making you feel like it wasn't real work or real success. Now they want to benefit from that same success, but they don't want to admit they were wrong about its value. He was right, but that didn't make it hurt less. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to prove that my choices were valid, that I could build something meaningful and sustainable through my art. Now the people who should have been proudest of my success were treating it like a family resource they were entitled to access. The second scene happened the following week at Emma's graduate school awards ceremony. She was receiving recognition for her research on community mental health resources, and my parents had asked both Christopher and me to attend. It seemed like an olive branch, a chance to move past the uncomfortable phone call and focus on celebrating Emma's achievement. We met at the university's main auditorium, a grand space with soaring ceilings and mahogany paneling that made every whisper echo. My parents had saved seats in the third row, and we settled in just as the ceremony began. Emma looked beautiful in her navy blue dress, her hair pulled back in the elegant updo I'd taught her to do when she was still in high school. As we watched various students receive awards for academic excellence and community service, I felt the familiar warmth of family pride. Whatever tensions existed between us, I was genuinely happy for Emma's success. She'd worked hard for this recognition, and she deserved to be celebrated. But during the reception afterward, while we stood in the elegant lobby with other families congratulating their graduates, I began to notice things that made my chest tighten with recognition and dread. When other parents asked about their children, my mother spent 5 minutes describing Emma's research, her future career plans, and her commitment to social justice. When someone asked about me, she said, "Oh, Olivia makes jewelry. She's getting married next month to a lovely accountant. Makes jewelry, not runs a successful artisan business or has built an incredible creative career. Makes jewelry, like it was something I did with my hands to pass the time." Christopher squeezed my arm gently, letting me know he'd heard it too. Later, when we were all standing near the refreshment table, I overheard a conversation that made everything clear. My father was talking to another parent about family financial planning when the man mentioned how proud he was that his daughter's pottery business was becoming profitable. "It's wonderful when their hobbies work out," my father said. "Our older daughter does something similar, makes jewelry, sells it online. It brings in decent money now, though we worry about the long-term stability. But at least she's marrying someone with a real career, decent money, hobby, real career." Every word was a small knife, cutting away at the professional identity I'd worked years to build. But what happened next was worse. Emma appeared beside us, glowing from her recent recognition, and joined the conversation with the other family. "My sister is so creative," she said to the couple. "She has this little jewelry business that's been doing really well lately. She was even in some magazines. It's amazing what you can accomplish with social media these days. Little jewelry business. Been doing really well lately." Like it was a recent development, a lucky break rather than years of dedicated work. The woman turned to me with polite interest. "How exciting. What kind of jewelry do you specialize in?" Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Oh, mostly wedding pieces, custom rings, that sort of thing. It's been a fun creative outlet for her, while she figures out what she really wants to do." Creative outlet. Figures out what she really wants to do. I stood there, surrounded by my own family, listening to them systematically diminish everything I'd built while presenting themselves as supportive parents of a daughter who was still finding her way. Christopher's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture of solidarity that almost made me cry right there in the lobby. The conversation continued around me while I processed what I was hearing. These people, my parents, my sister, had been watching my success for years, tracking my income and achievements, but they'd never actually seen it as legitimate. In their minds, I was still the confused recent graduate who needed guidance toward a real career. My business success was just an extended phase they were politely tolerating. When we finally left the reception, Christopher and I walked to our car in silence. The evening air was cool, and the campus was beautiful under the old-fashioned street lamps, but I felt like I was seeing everything through a fog of betrayal and hurt. "They've never taken me seriously," I said once we were in the car. "Not once in all these years." "I know," Christopher said quietly. "And now they want your money while still refusing to respect your work." That night, I lay awake replaying every conversation, every family gathering, every phone call where my achievements had been subtly dismissed or redirected. I'd been so focused on building my business and planning our wedding that I'd missed the pattern of disrespect that had been there all along. But I was about to learn that disrespect was only the beginning. My family's true colors were about to emerge in ways that would make their casual dismissal seem almost affectionate. The third escalation came 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening when Christopher and I were having dinner at our favorite restaurant to celebrate landing a major commission from a boutique hotel chain. They wanted custom jewelry pieces for their gift shop in 3 locations, representing months of steady work and enough income to allow us to put a serious down payment on the house we'd been looking at. We were sharing a bottle of wine and discussing timeline logistics when my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Can you call me when you get home? Important family meeting tomorrow, and Mom wants to make sure you can be there." I showed Christopher the message, and we both felt the same knot of dread forming. Family meetings were rare in our household, usually reserved for major announcements or serious problems. Given the recent tension over the loan request, neither of us expected good news. I called Emma from our car after dinner, putting the phone on speaker so Christopher could hear the conversation. "What's this meeting about?" I asked. "I can't really get into it over the phone," Emma said, her voice tight with stress. "But Mom and Dad want to talk to you about some things. About your business and the wedding and just family stuff." "Emma, that doesn't tell me anything." "What kind of family stuff?" "Look, Sophie, I know you're stressed about money right now, and I know Mom and Dad's request caught you off guard. This meeting is a chance for everyone to sit down and work things out like adults." Stressed about money, caught off guard. Every word choice revealed how my family had reframed the situation. In their version, I was struggling financially and had overreacted to a reasonable request for help. "I'm not stressed about money," I said carefully. "I told Mom I couldn't afford to loan $15,000, not that I was having financial problems." "Right, but that's part of what they want to discuss. They think there might be some miscommunication about your situation." Christopher and I exchanged glances. Miscommunication suggested that my explanation of why I couldn't loan the money hadn't been believed or accepted. "What time is this meeting?" I asked. "Tomorrow at 7, at Mom and Dad's house. They're making dinner, so plan to stay for a while." After I hung up, Christopher and I sat in our driveway for 10 minutes, trying to decode what we'd just heard. "They're going to ambush you," Christopher said finally. "This isn't a family meeting, it's an intervention designed to pressure you into giving them money." I wanted to argue with him, to believe that my family was simply concerned and wanted to clear up any misunderstandings. But everything about Emma's tone and word choices suggested that Christopher was right. "Should I go?" I asked. "That's up to you. But if you do go, I'm coming with you." They didn't invite you. They didn't invite me to the last conversation either. But they're discussing our shared finances and our wedding budget. If this is really about family communication, then your fiancé should be part of the conversation. That night, I called my mother to confirm the meeting and let her know Christopher would be joining us. "Oh, that's not necessary," she said immediately. "This is really just family business. Christopher is going to be family in 3 weeks," I pointed out. "And since you want to discuss my finances, he should be there." "Well, I suppose if you insist, but this might be easier if we keep it simple." The word easier sent chills through me. Easier for whom? Easier to pressure me without a witness. Easier to manipulate me without someone who might call out problematic behavior. I spent the next day anxious and distracted, making careless mistakes in my work and checking the clock every few minutes. Christopher came home early from the office, so we could discuss strategy before heading to my parents' house. "Whatever they ask for, the answer is no," he said. "Not let me think about it, or maybe we can work something out. Just no." "What if they have a legitimate emergency?" I asked. "Sophie, they already told you this wasn't an emergency. It was an investment opportunity, and a kitchen renovation. Those are wants, not needs." He was right, but family conditioning is powerful. I'd been raised to prioritize everyone else's comfort over my own boundaries, to view saying no as selfish rather than self-protective. We arrived at my parents' house at exactly 7 o'clock. The familiar scent of my mother's pot roast filled the air, and the dining room table was set for 5 people with the good china that usually only appeared on holidays. Everything looked normal, welcoming, like dozens of other family dinners I'd enjoyed in that same room. But Emma's expression when she answered the door told a different story. She looked nervous, avoiding eye contact while she hugged me hello and offered Christopher a tight smile. "How was traffic?" she asked, making small talk while we followed her to the living room. "Fine," I said. "Emma, what's really going on here?" Before she could answer, my parents emerged from the kitchen, my mother wiping her hands on a dish towel, and my father carrying a beer that was clearly not his first of the evening. "Olivia, Christopher," my mother said with artificial brightness. "So glad you could make it. Dinner will be ready in just a few minutes, but first we thought we'd sit down and have a little chat." The living room felt smaller than usual. Perhaps because of the formal way everyone arranged themselves. My parents took their usual spots on the couch. Emma settled into the armchair by the window, and Christopher and I were left with the love seat that faced everyone else. It felt like we were on trial. So, my father began, setting down his beer and leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Your mother tells me there was some confusion about our request for help. Request for help. Not loan request, not financial favor. Help, as if I'd misunderstood their need, rather than declined their demand. I don't think there was any confusion. I said carefully. You asked for $15,000, and I explained that I couldn't afford to loan that amount. Right, but that's where we're having trouble understanding. My mother interjected. Emma showed us those magazine articles about your business. We know you're charging premium prices for custom pieces. $15,000 should be manageable for someone in your position. Emma showed us. My sister hadn't just mentioned the articles in passing. She'd presented them as evidence of my financial capacity. Making good money and having $15,000 available to loan are two completely different things, Christopher said calmly. Small business owners typically reinvest most of their profit back into the business. My father's attention shifted to Christopher with laser focus. And what's your take on this situation? As Sophie's financial advisor, the way he said financial advisor was loaded with condescension, as if Christopher was some hired consultant rather than my equal partner in life decisions. My take is that Sophie has built something incredible, and she gets to decide how to manage the income from her own work, Christopher replied. Of course, my mother said smoothly. No one's questioning Sophie's right to make her own decisions. We're just trying to understand why she wouldn't want to help family when she has the means to do so. And there it was, the manipulation disguised as concern, the implication that my boundaries were evidence of selfishness rather than responsible financial management. Because she doesn't have the means, Christopher said firmly. She has income, but that income supports two people and a business with ongoing expenses. Well, Emma said, speaking for the first time since we'd sat down, maybe we could look at this differently. Maybe instead of a loan, Sophie could bring the family in as investors. That way everyone benefits when the business grows. Investors. My own sister was suggesting that my family buy their way into ownership of the business I'd built from nothing. The room went quiet while everyone waited for my response. I could feel my heart racing, my palms getting sweaty, as I processed what had just been suggested. You want to buy into my business? I asked Emma. Not buy, exactly. More like family investment. You know, pooling resources so everyone can succeed together. I looked around the room, taking in my parents' expectant faces and Emma's hopeful expression. They had planned this. The magazine research, the family meeting, the investment proposal, none of this was spontaneous concern. It was a coordinated campaign to claim ownership of my success. My business isn't for sale, I said quietly. No one said anything about selling. My father said, we're talking about family partnership, shared resources, shared success. I don't want family partnership, I said, my voice getting stronger. I want to keep my business independent. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My mother's welcoming smile disappeared, and my father's expression hardened into something I'd never seen directed at me before. Well, my mother said, her voice crisp with disapproval, I hope you'll reconsider. Families should support each other, and this seems like an opportunity for everyone to benefit. But I was done considering. For the first time in my adult life, I was seeing my family clearly, not as the supportive foundation I'd always believed them to be, but as people who viewed my success as their opportunity and my boundaries as their obstacle. What happened next would test every relationship I'd ever counted on and force me to choose between family peace and self-respect. The fourth and final escalation began 3 days before our wedding, when I thought the worst of the family drama was behind us. After the disastrous family meeting, Christopher and I had established clear boundaries, no more financial discussions, no more demands for business information, and no attempts to guilt me into changing my position. My parents had agreed to respect our decision and focus on celebrating the wedding. I should have known that agreement was too easy. The call came at 8 in the morning on Wednesday, while I was doing final fittings for the bridesmaids' jewelry and trying to manage last-minute vendor coordination. My phone rang with an unknown local number, which I almost ignored until I realized it might be the florist calling from a different line. "Sophie, this is your Uncle Robert, my father's older brother, a man I hadn't spoken to in over a year, and who had never called me directly about anything." The knot in my stomach was immediate. "Hi, Uncle Robert. Is everything okay? Well, that's what I'm calling about. Your parents are pretty upset about this situation with the family business investment, and they asked me to talk to you." Family business investment. In the span of 3 days, my individual jewelry business had become a family business in their conversations with extended relatives. "I'm not sure what they told you," I said carefully, "but there's no family business investment. There's my business, which I run independently." "Right, but that's the problem, Sophie. Your parents put a lot of time and money into supporting your education and your creative pursuits. They helped you get established, and now that you're successful, it seems ungrateful to cut them out of the benefits." They helped me get established. This was news to me. My parents had paid for part of my college education, like many parents do, but they'd never contributed a penny to my business. I'd bought every tool, every supply, every piece of equipment with my own money earned from my own sales. "Uncle Robert, I appreciate that my parents asked you to call, but I think there might be some miscommunication about my business history. Look, Sophie, I'm not trying to get involved in family drama, but your father is my brother, and when he tells me he's struggling financially while his daughter refuses to help despite making good money, that concerns me. Struggling financially, refuses to help, making good money." Every phrase was carefully chosen to paint me as the villain in a story where my parents were the victims of their ungrateful daughter's success. "Did they tell you what kind of help they asked for?" I asked. "Some family investment opportunity that would benefit everyone. Sounds reasonable to me." Family investment opportunity. They had completely reframed their demand for access to my business as something I was selfishly withholding from the family. "Uncle Robert, they asked me to give them $15,000 and consider making them investors in my business. I declined both requests. $15,000 isn't much when you're running a successful business, Sophie, and family investment seems like smart planning." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Uncle Robert employing every guilt tactic my parents had tried and a few new ones. I was being selfish. I was forgetting my family obligations. I was letting success go to my head. I was hurting people who loved me. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking with rage and my chest was tight with anxiety. 3 days before my wedding, my family had recruited extended relatives to pressure me into giving them money and ownership of my business. I called Christopher immediately. "They're bringing in reinforcements," I told him. "Uncle Robert just called to tell me I'm being ungrateful and selfish." "What did you tell him?" "The truth, but he didn't want to hear it." "Christopher, they're telling people that I'm refusing to help struggling family members while I'm making tons of money. They're making me look like a monster." "You're not a monster. You're someone with healthy boundaries who won't be manipulated into funding other people's wishes." But even as Christopher said it, I could feel the family conditioning kicking in, doubt creeping into my mind about whether I was being too harsh, too rigid, too protective of money that could help people I loved. That doubt evaporated completely when Emma called 2 hours later. "Sophie, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice shaky with nerves. "Mom and Dad are planning to talk to you at the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night, in front of everyone." My blood went cold. "What do you mean, talk to me?" "They're going to bring up the family investment thing again. They think, if they do it publicly, with Christopher's family there, and all the wedding guests, you'll be more reasonable." Public pressure. At my own rehearsal dinner, in front of my future in-laws and all our friends, my parents were planning to ambush me with financial demands, designed to embarrass me into compliance. "Emma, please tell me you're not okay with this." The silence stretched long enough that I knew the answer before she spoke. "I think they have a point, Sophie, about family supporting each other. And if it helps them out while the business grows, isn't that good for everyone?" My own sister, the person I'd trusted with my dreams and struggles and fears, had fully bought into my parents' narrative. In her mind, I was the problem, the selfish daughter who'd forgotten where she came from. Emma, they want to own part of my business, the business I built by myself, with my own money, through my own work. How is that good for me? Because family is more important than money, Sophie, and because they supported you getting to where you are. Family is more important than money. The same phrase I'd heard my entire life, always deployed when someone wanted me to sacrifice my own interests for someone else's benefit. That night, Christopher and I sat in our apartment, surrounded by wedding favors and final preparation lists, trying to figure out how to handle what was essentially a planned public humiliation designed to force me into compliance. We could elope, Christopher suggested. Just go to the courthouse tomorrow and be done with it. That's letting them win, I said. That's letting them turn our wedding into their manipulation tool. Then we face them down. We go to the rehearsal dinner, and if they start their pressure campaign, we shut it down immediately. In front of everyone? At our own wedding celebration? Christopher was quiet for a moment, running his fingers through his hair, the way he did when he was thinking through complex problems. Sophie, they're the ones planning to make this public. They're the ones choosing to use our wedding as leverage. If we have to shut them down publicly, that's their choice, not ours. He was right, but that didn't make it easier. The idea of confronting my family in front of our wedding guests, of potentially ruining what should be a celebration of love and commitment, made me feel sick, but the alternative, giving in to their demands to avoid public embarrassment, was worse. If I allowed them to use social pressure to manipulate me into giving them money and business ownership, where would it end? What other decisions would become subject to family approval? What other boundaries would they feel entitled to cross? The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Friday evening at a beautiful restaurant overlooking the lake, with 40 guests including both families, our wedding party, and our closest friends. Everything had been planned months in advance. From the menu, to the seating arrangements, to the timeline of toasts and thank you speeches. I spent Friday morning getting my nails done and trying to prepare mentally for whatever my parents had planned. Christopher spent the day handling last-minute wedding logistics and texting me occasional reassurances that everything would be fine. Neither of us was prepared for what actually happened. We arrived at the restaurant early to check on setup and greet guests as they arrived. The space looked perfect. Round tables with white linens and centerpieces I'd designed myself, string lights creating warm ambiance, and windows overlooking the water where sailboats drifted in the evening light. My parents arrived with Emma and Uncle Robert, along with my aunt and 2 cousins I rarely saw. They were dressed in their finest clothes and carrying wrapped gifts, looking like any other loving family celebrating their daughter's upcoming wedding. Christopher's parents brought flowers and champagne, hugging me warmly and telling me how beautiful everything looked. His siblings and their families filled the space with laughter and conversation, creating the kind of warm, celebratory atmosphere I'd hoped for. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Guests mingled, drinks were served, and I began to relax into the celebration. Maybe my parents had changed their minds. Maybe they decided that a wedding was not the place for financial negotiations. I should have known better. The ambush came during the toasts, after Christopher's father had given a beautiful speech about love and partnership and his hopes for our future happiness. My father stood up with his glass raised, and the room quieted expectantly. "I'd like to say a few words about my daughter," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the restaurant. "Sophie has always been creative, always been independent, always been determined to do things her own way." The words sounded loving, proud, exactly what you'd expect from a father celebrating his daughter's wedding. But I could hear something underneath them, and my chest began to tighten. "She's built a wonderful little business making jewelry, and we're so proud of how successful she's become. In fact, she's become so successful that we've been hoping she might consider bringing family into the business as partners." The room went completely silent. Every guest was looking between my father and me, processing what they'd just heard. This wasn't a toast, it was a public pressure campaign. "Family businesses are the backbone of our community," my father continued, and we think Sophie's talents combined with family support could create something really special. We're hoping she'll consider our proposal for family investment and partnership." He raised his glass as if he'd just offered a traditional wedding toast, leaving me sitting at the head table with 40 pairs of eyes watching my response. This was the moment of truth. I could smile and deflect, preserving family harmony and wedding celebration while tacitly agreeing to discuss their demands later. Or I could speak the truth, clearly and publicly, regardless of the consequences. Christopher's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently, not pressuring me toward any particular response, just reminding me that I wasn't alone. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady but my voice clear when I spoke. "Thank you, Dad, for those kind words about my business. Since you've brought this up publicly, I want everyone here to understand what's being discussed." I paused, looking around the room at faces that ranged from confused to concerned to supportive. My parents recently asked me to loan them $15,000 for non-emergency expenses, and when I explained that I couldn't afford that, they asked me to consider making them investors in my business. I declined both requests because I want to keep my business independent and because I don't have $15,000 available to loan. My father's face was turning red, and my mother was making sharp gestures for me to sit down and stop talking. "I love my family," I continued, "but I also love the business I've built from nothing, with my own hands and my own money. It's not a little business or a cute hobby. It's my career, my passion, and my financial independence." I turned to face my father directly. "I wish you could celebrate my success without trying to claim ownership of it. I wish you could be proud of what I've accomplished without immediately calculating how it might benefit you." The silence in the room was deafening. 40 people holding their breath, watching a family implode at what should have been a celebration. My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Well," she said, her voice tight with fury, "I can see where your priorities are. Money over family. Success over gratitude. I hope you're happy with your choices, Olivia." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, with my father and Emma following close behind. Uncle Robert and my other relatives trailed after them, leaving empty chairs and abandoned dinner plates at tables that had been full moments before. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of concerned friends offering support and Christopher's family rallying around us with fierce protectiveness. Several people approached me privately to say they couldn't believe what my parents had done, that using a wedding celebration to pressure someone for money was manipulative and inappropriate. But the damage was done. Half our families were gone. Our rehearsal dinner was ruined, and our wedding was less than 24 hours away. That night, as Christopher and I sat in our apartment surrounded by wedding gifts and morning preparation lists, I cried for the family I'd thought I had, and the celebration that should have been perfect. "Are you okay?" Christopher asked, stroking my hair while I leaned against his shoulder. "I think so," I said. "I'm sad, but I'm not sorry. They needed to hear the truth, even if they didn't want to." "I'm proud of you," he said. "It took courage to stand up for yourself like that. I couldn't have done it without you there." "You could have. You're stronger than you know." The next morning, as I was getting ready for our wedding, Emma called. "Sophie, I'm so sorry about last night. Mom and Dad went too far. Are you coming to the wedding?" I asked. "I want to, but they're saying the family shouldn't support you after what you said." "Emma, what I said was the truth. I'm not giving them money or making them business partners. Those boundaries aren't changing, whether they come to the wedding or not. I know, and I think I understand why you said no. I just wish things could be different." "They can be different," I said, "but only if people are willing to respect boundaries instead of trying to manipulate their way around them." Emma came to the wedding by herself, sitting in the second row and crying during our vows. My parents didn't come. Uncle Robert didn't come. Half of my family chose money over relationship, proving exactly what their love had always been conditional on. But the wedding was beautiful anyway. Christopher's family embraced me as their own. Our friends celebrated with genuine joy, and Emma's presence reminded me that some relationships could survive truth-telling. As Christopher and I danced our first dance as husband and wife, I felt something I'd never experienced before. The peace that comes from knowing exactly where you stand with people, regardless of whether that truth is comfortable. The aftermath of our wedding and the family confrontation unfolded slowly over the following months, like a complex piece of jewelry taking shape under careful hands. Some elements were painful, others surprising, and a few were genuinely healing in ways I hadn't expected. The immediate consequence was silence. For 3 weeks after the wedding, none of my family members contacted me. No thank you calls for the beautiful ceremony, no questions about our honeymoon, no casual check-ins that had been routine for my entire adult life. The silence felt both devastating and revealing. If they couldn't have my money, they apparently saw no reason to maintain relationship. Christopher and I returned from our honeymoon in Costa Rica to find a certified letter waiting in our mailbox. Inside was a formal document from my parents' attorney, outlining their belief that they had legal claim to partial ownership of my business based on substantial support provided during the establishment phase. The letter demanded financial records, business documentation, and a meeting to resolve this matter amicably. "They're suing you?" Christopher asked, reading over my shoulder. "They're threatening to sue me," I corrected. Though the distinction felt minimal, they want to scare me into giving them what they want. I called my own attorney, a woman who specialized in small business law and had helped me establish proper contracts and liability protection years earlier. When I explained the situation, she was quiet for a long moment. "Sophie, based on what you've told me, they have no legal grounds for ownership claims. You've never received business funding from them, you've never entered into any partnership agreements, and supporting a child's education doesn't create ownership rights in their future business ventures. So what do I do?" We respond professionally, clearly stating that their claims have no merit and that any further harassment will be considered litigation abuse. Most of the time, that's enough to end this kind of pressure. The legal response was sent within a week, and it worked exactly as my attorney predicted. My parents' lawyer never contacted us again, and no lawsuit was ever filed. They'd been hoping that legal intimidation would pressure me into compliance, but when faced with an actual legal professional, their bluff was called immediately. But the emotional aftermath was more complex than the legal one. Emma reached out 6 weeks after the wedding, asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, curious about whether our relationship could survive the family divide and genuinely missing my sister, despite everything that had happened. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop neither of us had been to before, in a part of town that held no family memories. Emma looked tired, older somehow, like the stress of the family conflict had aged her in visible ways. "I owe you an apology," she said, before I'd even ordered my drink. "A real one, not the conditional ones Mom and Dad keep suggesting I make." "What kind of conditional apologies?" I asked. "The kind where I apologize for the way things happened but still think you should have handled it differently. Where I say I'm sorry they pressured you, but still believe you should consider their proposal." We found a quiet table in the corner, and Emma spent the next hour explaining what had been happening in our family since the wedding. My parents were telling everyone who would listen that I'd turned against family and chosen money over relationships. They were painting themselves as the victims of an ungrateful daughter who'd forgotten where she came from. "But the more I listened to them," Emma said, "the more I realized how wrong that narrative was. They weren't hurt that you couldn't help them. They were angry that you wouldn't help them. There's a difference. What made you see that?" I asked. "A conversation with Christopher's sister at the wedding. She told me about how her brother had asked Christopher for money years ago for a business investment, and Christopher had said no because he couldn't afford it. And you know what happened? Her brother said, 'Okay, no problem,' and never brought it up again. That's how normal families handle these things." Emma went on to explain that she'd been gradually realizing how manipulative our parents' behavior had been, not just toward me, but throughout our childhood. The way they'd played favorites, used guilt as a control mechanism, and made their love feel conditional on compliance with their expectations. "I'm not ready to cut them off completely," she said, "but I'm also not willing to participate in their campaign against you. I love you, Sophie. I'm proud of what you've built, and I'm sorry it took me so long to say that clearly. That coffee meeting was the beginning of rebuilding trust between Emma and me, though it was a gradual process that required lots of honest conversations about family dynamics and individual boundaries. She never tried to mediate between my parents and me, never suggested that I should just give them a chance or try to work things out for the sake of family unity. Meanwhile, my business continued to grow in ways that validated every boundary I'd fought to maintain. The boutique hotel chain expanded my commission to 5 additional locations. A major jewelry retailer reached out about carrying my pieces in their stores. 2 different magazines featured my work in articles about successful women entrepreneurs. Each success felt like proof that my instincts had been right, that protecting my business independence had been worth the family cost. 6 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected phone call from my father. Not my mother, who had been the primary driver of the financial demands, but my father, whose voice sounded smaller and older than I remembered. "Olivia, I was hoping we could talk about what?" I asked, not ready to make the conversation easy for him. About everything. About the way things went wrong, and whether we can fix them. We met for lunch at a restaurant halfway between our homes, a neutral location that felt appropriate for what might be either reconciliation or final closure. He looked like he'd aged years in the 6 months since our confrontation, his hair grayer and his face more lined with stress. "I owe you an apology," he said once we'd ordered. "Not for asking for help. Families should be able to ask each other for help. But for the way we asked, and for what we did when you said no. What specifically are you apologizing for?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee with unnecessary focus. "For not respecting your no. For pressuring you through other family members. For bringing it up at your rehearsal dinner. For threatening legal action when we had no grounds for it." He paused. "For not celebrating your success without immediately trying to figure out how it could benefit us." Those were the words I'd been waiting years to hear. The acknowledgement that their behavior had been inappropriate, regardless of their intentions. "Where's Mom in all this?" I asked. "Your mother is struggling with admitting she was wrong. She's hurt that you chose to embarrass the family publicly instead of working things out privately. Dad, you made it public when you brought it up during the toasts." I just responded honestly to a public pressure campaign. I know that now. I knew it then too, if I'm being honest. But I was desperate, and I thought public pressure might work where private conversation hadn't. We talked for 2 hours, covering everything from my childhood perception that my business wasn't taken seriously to his genuine financial stress that had prompted the initial request for money. He explained that his company had been struggling, that he'd been facing potential layoffs, and that the opportunity to invest in his friend's business had felt like a lifeline. "But that doesn't excuse trying to make your daughter fund my financial security," he said. "You weren't responsible for solving my problems, and I was wrong to pressure you into thinking you were." The conversation felt like the beginning of real honesty between us, the kind of communication we'd never had when family roles and expectations got in the way. "Can we try again?" he asked, as we prepared to leave. "Not with the business stuff. I understand that's off the table permanently, but with just being father and daughter, we can try," I said. "But it means accepting that I'm an adult who makes my own decisions about my business, my money, and my boundaries. Even when you disagree with those decisions, I can do that," he said. "I want to do that." The reconciliation with my father was gradual and required consistent proof that he meant what he'd said. He called regularly just to check in, without any agenda beyond maintaining connection. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, and listened to my answers without immediately calculating business implications. When I mentioned major commissions or magazine features, he expressed genuine pride without any accompanying suggestions about family investment opportunities. My mother's journey was longer and more complicated. She eventually reached out through Emma, asking if I would be willing to meet with her and a family therapist to work through our communication issues. I agreed, though I made it clear that therapy wouldn't change my business boundaries. It could only help us figure out how to have a relationship that respected those boundaries. Those therapy sessions were brutal and necessary, forcing conversations about family patterns that had been toxic for years. My mother had to confront her belief that supporting her children's educations entitled her to partial ownership of their adult successes. I had to articulate why financial independence was so important to me, and how her dismissive language about my work had damaged our relationship long before money became an issue. The breakthrough came during our fourth session, when the therapist asked my mother directly, if Sophie had become a successful doctor, would you expect partial ownership of her medical practice because you helped pay for her education? Of course not, my mother said immediately. Then why is her art business different? The question hung in the air while my mother processed the double standard she'd been applying. Medical practice, law firm, accounting business, all real careers that family investment wouldn't entitle you to own. But art business, creative work, something that started as a hobby, somehow that was different, more communal, less deserving of individual ownership. I think I saw it as less serious, she admitted finally. Like it was something we could all be part of because it wasn't a real business. But it is a real business, I said. It supports me financially, it requires professional skills and business knowledge, and it deserves the same respect you'd give any other career. That session marked the beginning of actual change in our relationship. My mother started asking about my work in ways that showed genuine interest rather than dismissive tolerance. She stopped referring to it as my little business or hobby and began using language that acknowledged its professional legitimacy. More importantly, she stopped hinting about family investment opportunities or suggesting ways the business could benefit everyone. She began to understand that my success belonged to me, just like her nursing career had belonged to her and my father's management position belonged to him. The process took over a year, with regular therapy sessions and careful communication as we rebuilt trust. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns resurged and boundaries had to be reinforced. But gradually, we found our way to a relationship based on respect rather than expectation. 2 years after our wedding, Christopher and I bought the house we'd been saving for, a beautiful craftsman with perfect light for my expanded studio space and room for the family we were beginning to plan. When my parents came to see it for the first time, my mother admired the professional studio setup I'd created and asked thoughtful questions about my workflow and creative process. "I'm proud of what you've built," she said, standing in the doorway of my studio and taking in the organized chaos of works in progress. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see it clearly." Emma's relationship with our parents evolved differently than mine. She maintained closer contact, but also established clearer boundaries about what topics were open for family discussion and which decisions were hers to make independently. She became something of a bridge between my parents and me, helping facilitate communication without taking responsibility for managing our relationships. The extended family relationships were harder to repair. Uncle Robert and several cousins had been so thoroughly convinced by my parents' initial narrative that they remained convinced I was selfish and ungrateful. Family gatherings were awkward for years, with clear divisions between those who supported my boundaries and those who believed I should have helped family, regardless of the personal cost. But I also discovered that some family members had been quietly supportive all along. My Aunt Linda called a few months after the wedding to tell me she'd been proud of my response at the rehearsal dinner. "Your grandmother would have been proud too," she said. "She always said that women needed to protect what they built, because no one else would do it for them." Those unexpected sources of support reminded me that family loyalty doesn't require sacrificing individual autonomy, and that the people who truly love you want you to succeed on your own terms. 3 years post-wedding, my business has continued to grow beyond anything I could have imagined when I was sketching designs in coffee shops. I have a waiting list of clients that extends 6 months out, wholesale relationships with boutique stores across 3 states, and have been featured in national publications as an example of successful artisan entrepreneurship. But more importantly, I have relationships based on genuine respect rather than conditional approval. Christopher and I celebrate each other's successes without immediately calculating personal benefit. My parents ask about my work because they're interested in my life, not because they're looking for opportunities to insert themselves into my business. Emma calls regularly to share her own professional victories and personal challenges, and our conversations feel like real friendship rather than family obligation. We support each other through difficult decisions and celebrate achievements without keeping score of who owes whom, what level of support. The family members who couldn't accept my boundaries have faded from regular contact, but that feels like a natural consequence rather than a devastating loss. The relationships that survived the conflict are stronger and more honest than they were before, built on foundation of mutual respect rather than unexamined expectations. Most surprisingly, the crisis taught me that I was much stronger than I'd believed. For years, I'd been afraid that setting firm boundaries would result in total family rejection, that choosing myself over family peace would leave me isolated and unsupported. Instead, I discovered that the people who really loved me wanted me to protect what I'd built, and that standing up for myself attracted more respect than accommodation ever had. Now, when I'm working in my studio, torch in hand, silver solder cooling on the ceramic pad, afternoon light streaming through windows that overlook our garden, I feel the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something beautiful with my own hands and protecting it with my own voice. Every piece I make is a reminder that art has value, that creative work deserves respect, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let others diminish what you've built. This experience taught me that family relationships, like any other relationships, need boundaries to remain healthy, that supporting each other doesn't mean funding each other's wishes without question, that success belongs to the person who creates it, regardless of who might benefit from claiming it. If you're facing pressure from family members who want access to your success without having supported your struggles, I want you to know that you're not obligated to fund other people's opportunities just because you're related to them. Your achievements belong to you. Your boundaries are valid. Your success doesn't become family property just because it exceeds their expectations. It's okay to say no to people you love when they ask for things you can't or don't want to give. It's okay to protect what you've built, even from family members who think their relationship to you entitles them to ownership of your work. It's okay to choose your own financial security over other people's wishful thinking, even when those people try to make you feel selfish for having boundaries. Family should celebrate your success, not immediately calculate how it can serve their needs. Love should feel supportive, not transactional. The people who genuinely care about you want you to protect what you've built, not give it away to prove your love for them. I learned that the fear of losing family approval was keeping me from fully experiencing my own success. When I stopped trying to manage everyone else's comfort with my achievements, I could finally enjoy what I'd worked so hard to create. When I stopped apologizing for doing well, I could start celebrating doing well. If family members are pressuring you to share your success in ways that don't feel right, trust that feeling. Your instincts about what you can afford to give, financially, emotionally, professionally, are more accurate than other people's opinions about what you should be willing to sacrifice. The relationships that survive boundary setting are the ones worth keeping. The family members who respect your right to make your own decisions about your own resources are the ones who actually love you unconditionally. Everyone else is operating from self-interest, disguised as family obligation. Building something valuable, whether it's a business, a career, a creative practice, or just a healthy life, requires protecting it from people who would exploit it. Sometimes those people are strangers, and sometimes they're family members who think love gives them unlimited access to your resources. Your success is not a family emergency that requires immediate sharing. Your achievements are not community property that becomes available for redistribution once you reach a certain level of prosperity. You get to decide what you do with what you've built, and you don't owe anyone detailed explanations or justifications for those decisions. The most important lesson I learned through this experience is that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. That choosing your own well-being over family harmony isn't betrayal, it's self-respect. That disappointing people who want things you can't or won't give is not failure, it's honesty. If you're watching this video because your own family has started treating your success like their opportunity, please know that you're not alone in this experience. So many of us have discovered that the people who dismissed our work suddenly became very interested when that work started generating significant income. Your response to that interest gets to be whatever feels right for you. You can choose to share your success, or you can choose to protect it. You can decide to bring family members into your business, or you can decide to keep it independent. You can loan money to relatives, or you can decline those requests. All of these choices are valid, and none of them make you a good or bad person. What matters is that the choice is yours to make, free from manipulation, guilt, or pressure campaigns designed to wear down your resistance. What matters is that your relationships are based on genuine care rather than transactional expectation. What matters is that you get to enjoy your own success without immediately having to figure out how to distribute it to everyone else. I hope my story helps you feel less alone if you're dealing with family financial pressure. I hope it gives you permission to set whatever boundaries feel necessary to protect what you've built. I hope it reminds you that your work has value, your success belongs to you, and your boundaries deserve respect even from people who don't like them. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for supporting creators who share their real experiences instead of just their highlight reels. If this story resonated with you, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and share your own experiences with family boundary setting. Subscribe if you want to see more content about protecting your creative work and building healthy relationships with difficult family members. Remember that your success is not a betrayal of where you came from. It's evidence of where you're going. You deserve to celebrate what you've accomplished without immediately calculating how to share it with everyone else. You deserve relationships that feel supportive rather than extractive. You deserve to protect what you've built with your own hands, your own vision, and your own relentless work. Your family may have called your dreams a cute hobby until they saw what those dreams could earn. But you knew all along that what you were building had value, even when no one else could see it. Trust that knowledge. Protect that vision. Celebrate that success. You've earned every bit of it.